Hello, my name is Catherine and welcome to my kitchen and also to my two YouTube channels, Cook from the Past and Homestead in the Woods. And it's the middle of August now and I have a ton of pickling cucumbers that need to be used up. And so this particular recipe, it's bread and butter pickles, and it's a very old traditional recipe that I'm going to be using. So that speaks to past cooking, and it also speaks to homesteading because we do grow some of our own vegetables here. So I'm going to be making the bread and butter pickles today. First thing I'll be doing is slicing them up. I'm also going to be using some onions and getting those sliced up. As soon as that's done, they'll be in a bowl. Put that with some salt and some water to make a brine, and then those are going to be sitting for 2 hours. But without further ado, let's just get started on those pickles. The first task is to get the cucumbers sliced up. I'm just removing the tops and the bottoms, and then I'm cutting them about 1/4 of an inch. About like that. And as I'm cutting them, they're going to go into the bowl. Now I need 10 cups of these. So you're probably wondering why it is I'm doing this all by hand. Yes, a mandolin would be a whole lot faster, and if you have one, certainly use that. But I had one that it just seemed so dangerous. I was slicing myself up on that thing terribly, and so I decided I'm just going to do this by hand because I really didn't appreciate those cuts on my hands, and certainly I couldn't be doing this with bleeding fingers. So if you have a mandolin that you like, by all means use it, but for me this is the way to go, at least for now. Alright, I am down to the last cucumber now here, and I'm gonna get that finished up, and then we'll move on to slicing up the onions. The thing about bread and butter pickles, well, first of all, it has nothing to do with bread or butter, but I'm gonna find out before the end of this video and figure out what how the name bread and butter pickles even came to be. I'm very curious about what that is, so I will find out, and before the end of this video I will have an answer for you as to why these are called bread and butter pickles. But they are a sweet pickle, and so we're going to move on to the next step. There we go. All right, so the recipe calls for 4 medium onions, but these are actually quite large, so I'm going to be using just 3 of them, and when I consider how much onion I'm going to be putting in compared to how much cucumber slices, that sounds about right. As I'm peeling the skin off of these, I'm just kind of thinking that I wish I had chilled these onions ahead of time, because that is really the only way I have found to prevent the teary eyes when you're slicing onions, and that is to chill them first. That's the only thing. I know some people wear special glasses or goggles. I've never tried that actually, but I figure, well, why do that when all you really have to do is chill your onions? So I have a feeling I'm going to be starting to cry here pretty soon. So far so good, but I just wanted to show you about the size. Okay, yep, it's starting to get a little strong now. But I just wanted to show you about the size. Since this is a large onion, I've cut it almost in half. It's not quite a half. And then I'm going to cut it the long ways into 1/4, and then start doing some, ooh, oh my goodness, it's really getting bad. All right, got some slices going here. So this is about what you're looking for with the slices, and I'm just going to throw those in with the cucumbers. And I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do here, but I'm going to continue with these onions, and my eye's burning, and I'll be back to you when they're all done and ready to go into the mixture. So I'm still going at it with the onions, and I actually threw them down. I got the first one sliced up, but before that I threw the other two in the freezer to try them chill them a little bit before I sliced into them, but I fear it wasn't long enough, so we'll see. I pulled just one out. I'll start slicing that while the other one is hopefully getting a little more chilled. Just kind of curious if that little bit in the freezer was enough to make it a little less painless. This is really a very seriously aromatic onion. So far so good, huh? I think it's probably a good idea to keep the cut side of the other half down on the cutting board so I don't have that constantly coming at me. Well, I have to say that little bit of time in the freezer really did help. So far I'm not in tears. It's just getting a little hard to cut that way now. Okay, yes, it's starting to burn. Well, at least I am already halfway through this particular onion, so I'm going to keep it up and we'll catch back up in a minute. Okay, I've got all of the onions sliced. I must tell you, well, first of all, I only used 2 of those onions instead of all 3, because if you look and see the ratio of cucumber to onion, this is about right. I didn't want to overwhelm it with the onion, so I just stopped at the 2 large onions. So next thing to do is to add, now the recipe is for 10 cups of cucumber and the onions plus a ½ cup of salt. And because I used more than the 10 cups of cucumbers, I'm making it a 3/4 cup of salt instead of the ½ cup. ½ cup is what would have been called for, but I'm going with 3/4 of a cup since I have extra ingredients in here. So now this is canning and pickling salt. You got to use this. You cannot use regular table salt because it has anti-caking ingredients in it. This is just plain salt. So you need plain salt, nothing that has any anti-caking ingredients in it at all. You can also use Celtic sea salt or the Redmond's salt that you can use also, but I don't like the Redmond's salt because it has like little bits of mineral in it, which kind of biting into that is like biting into a grain of sand, and I have no appreciation for that whatsoever, and I think most people don't want to feel like they're biting into a grain of sand in their food. So I will either use this canning and pickling salt or I will use the Celtic salt, but I don't have any of that right now, so we're going with the canning and pickling. So next thing I'm going to do, I've got the salt all well mixed in. I can feel it in there. So I'm going to go off camera here and just cover this with cold water. Put some foil or saran wrap on it, something like that, because it's summertime and there's a lot of produce on the counter and it does attract gnats. So I don't want any of that in my pickle. So I will be covering it up. go do something else for 2 hours, and then I'll be coming back. Now that the cucumber chips and the onions are soaking in the salty water, the brine, we're going to be mixing together the solution that the pickles will be cooked in and canned with. So this is 3 cups of white vinegar, 2 cups of sugar, 2 tablespoons of mustard seed, 1 teaspoon of celery seed, and 1 teaspoon of ground turmeric. Okay, our cucumbers and onions have soaked for about 2 hours in the brine, all covered. I have drained them out and rinsed them well, and now we are going to continue on with the recipe. I am turning the burner on under this pan, and to the pan we are going to be adding this mixture. That we're going to add to the pan is the vinegar, sugar, and spices. I'm going to give them a good mix here because they've been sitting for a few minutes while those, or for a few hours while the cucumbers and onions were in the brine, but let's get those into the pan now. Try to get all of that sugar. And we're going to heat this until the sugar is completely dissolved, and we're going to want to bring this to a boil. As soon as this mixture comes to a boil, we're going to be adding the cucumbers and onions. So I'll be back when it's time to do that. Okay, the brine for these bread and butter pickles is boiling now. So I am going to add our cucumbers and onions. I'm going to do it carefully as I can so this stuff doesn't splash all over my kitchen. There we go. So while I was waiting for the brine to come to a boil, I got my jars ready in the canner. I'll show you that in a minute here. And I set up all of the supplies that I need to can these pickles. So once you get the cucumbers and onions in here, we're going to give it a good stir to make sure everything is coated. And just stir it every now and then until it comes to a boil. Once it comes to a boil, we're going to be ready to can our pickles. So up here I have the canner. This is a water bath canner. Actually, it's a stock pot, but it's a nice tall one, and so we're going to be able to use that for our water bath canning of these pickles. I've also got a piece of cork here that will help prevent any thermal shock when I take the hot jars out of the canner and the water. I don't want to set them down on a cold countertop, so that cork and this towel will help protect from any thermal shock that would cause our jar to shatter. I've also got my funnel, a ladle to pull the items out of the pot. I've got some vinegar in a small bowl, and then I've got my rings and my lids and a jar lifter. So I'm going to be working on stirring these cucumbers and onions in the brine. It's hot until it comes to a boil, and then we will proceed with getting our pickles canned. Okay, our cucumbers and onions are boiling in the brine, so we're ready to move on to the phase of canning these pickles. I'll go ahead and turn the pan off. We don't want them to cook too long. They just needed to be heated through, and we did accomplish that. All right, I have my canner here with my pint jars and hot water. I'm going to empty the water back into the pot because when we're processing these, we need 1 to 2 inches of water above the top of the jars so that they are completely underwater. All right, and now we're just going to start filling our jars. So I owed you an explanation of why these are called bread and butter pickles, and I may or may not have the answer. So my research tells me that there are possibly two stories. The first one is that a lady by the name of Cora Fanning, and if you will remember, well, maybe you don't remember, but anyway, there at least used to be a brand of pickles called Fanning's Pickles. And so the story goes that during the Depression, Mrs. Fanning developed this recipe for pickles, and she had a local grocer agree to carry these pickles in his store and sell them, and in exchange he would give her bread and butter from his store. So they became known as bread and butter pickles because that was the trade that they did. She gave his store pickles and he gave her bread and butter. The other story, which is also plausible, is that during the Depression, food was so scarce and hard to come by, and people had to make do with what they had. So a sandwich was invented, which was merely just pickles, sweet pickles, as these are, in between two slices of bread that had been buttered. So you've got bread that has been buttered with pickles in between, and that was the sandwich. So those are the two explanations, possible explanations that I have for why these are called bread and butter pickles. Both of them are plausible, so I really don't know what the answer is, but there we have it. As with many folklore items, there are frequently numerous answers to where the stories came from. So anyway, what we're doing here is filling our jars. I've got 5 jars in the canner that are filled with water, and I am emptying them out back into the pot as I go. And I'm filling these jars up to about a 1/2 inch of headspace, and that is from the top rim of the jar, about 1/2 inch. I almost always give more than what is called for as far as headspace, just because I've had it happen too many times where I use the exact headspace that is given in a recipe, and I still have siphoning of the contents out of the jar into the water. So that's why I do it that way. So I'm just using this little spoon to kind of pack things down and make sure that there's no air bubbles down in there. And then just adding enough liquid to give us that 1/2 inch headspace. Then I'm wiping the jar down with vinegar on a piece of paper towel. Add the lid, put the ring on just a finger tight. That's it. You don't want it too tight because air still needs to come out of the jar during the canning process. Okay. So I'm not going to pour any more, well, maybe just a little bit more of this water. But we're pretty good on the headspace now. Yeah, I'll do the rest of this, but for the rest of the jars, I'm going to take the jar to the sink because we have enough water in here now to cover the jars. So we've got 2 in there so far. This is supposed to make 5 pints. Sometimes the recipe makes exactly the amount that it says, and other times it's less, and then sometimes it's more. So I think that's just kind of a rule of thumb. Always have enough extra jars available in case it does go over the amount that was in the recipe. I'm trying to gently just kind of pack these pickles in so that I don't damage them. Okay, that is definitely enough water to cover these, so I will empty this into my sink. There's 2 more in here. Okay, and it does look like we've got enough pickles in here for the 2 additional pints. Well, now I'm not sure. We'll see. I might just hold off a little bit on this one and not put any more of the cucumbers and onions in, but do put in a little extra of the brine so that we have enough pickles for the 5th jar. This is just vinegar I'm putting in here, putting it around the edge, especially with anything that like this that is sweet, or if something has a high fat content, you want to make sure that there is nothing that will get in between the rim of that jar and the lid that you want to seal tightly. Okay, here's 4. And I'm going to take this last one and empty it in the sink. All right, I'm coming over to this other side and try to get all of these pickles out of here. Yeah, I think we're good. Here's 1 jar's worth here. All right, that worked out perfectly. Okay. This is the last one. Okay, I'm just going to cover this and it's going to come up to a hard boil and we'll come back, and that's pretty much all we need to do while it processes. Okay, these are at a full rolling boil. I'm going to turn it down a wee bit so it's not quite so brisk, but I'm going to set the timer for 10 minutes. Okay, the timer has gone off, 10 minutes have gone by, and I'm turning off the heat under this canner. Okay, our 10 minutes of processing is done. I actually turned the heat off 10 minutes ago, so this can come off. And we can pull our jars out. Okay, here we go. That is beautiful. So when you pull your jars out of the canner, make sure that there's no windows open where a draft is hitting them, no fans are on, nothing like that. No windows are open that will cause a draft. You don't want anything to cause a draft on your jars because that, again, could end up causing a thermal shock and your jars could shatter. So just getting them pulled out of this canner. I can see that we did not have any siphoning. There's none of the juice from inside the jars has come out of the jars and down into the canner. So we had a successful canning of these beautiful pickles. Let me see if I can show you here. Sometimes you'll see some bubbles. Well, I saw a little bit in here a minute ago. Sometimes you'll see some bubbles coming from the bottom, and that's fine, no problem at all. So I can see that nothing has sealed yet, but they're starting to flatten out. This one I think is getting ready to snap, but anyway, I'm not worried about them. I'll come back and check later. And successful canning. Okay, here are my pint jars of pickles. The next thing you want to do, you may notice when you take it out that some of the rings are loose, and that's fine. They're not going to stay on there anyway. But the other thing you want to look for is that the little nipple in the tops of these is down. They're all good, but I found one right here. You can probably see it. It is not. That is a jar that did not seal. And there's a couple things I can do. I can reprocess it, or I can just put it in the refrigerator, and that's the next one that I use. So that's what I'm going to do. For whatever reason, it did not seal. You can kind of hear it. That didn't seal, so it goes to the refrigerator. And that will get used. I don't want to reprocess it again because that will really give me mushy pickles. They're cooked at this point. So that is it. Other than that, all of these are good. After 24 hours sitting undisturbed, they will go into my pantry. I'll be labeling them, the date and what's in it, and I'll have good pickles for the coming year. Thanks for watching, and please remember to like with the little, excuse me, like, subscribe, and share. There's that subscription button down below, and you click on the little bell and decide how you want to receive your notifications, and also hit the thumbs up button to like it. I appreciate you being here. Thanks for being in my kitchen. Bye-bye.